Okay, so there was one question that was sent. Um, have you found awareness of feeling tones to be a helpful way of working with emotions? Wasn't quite sure what was meant by feeling tones. There may be a Western explanation of that expression, but there's also a Buddhist explanation. So I don't know about the Western one, but the Buddhist one I'm a little more familiar with. Um, so Buddha taught a practice known as the Four Establishments of Mindfulness. And this is a practice involving developing mindfulness of four types of objects. The first is the body, and then feelings, mind, and phenomena. So the body, mindfulness of the body includes mindfulness of our breathing and also our bodily postures and movements and actions, the things we do with our body, the parts of our body, what our body is made of, and so on. So there's various ways of developing mindfulness of the body. And then the second type of practice is feelings, mindfulness of feelings. So I think this is what the question is referring to. So it's good this came up because I don't know how it works in French, but in English, we have the word feeling and we have the word emotion. For some people, they are equated. Um, and we do in our language, we do sometimes say, I feel angry, I feel jealous. And, but in Buddhism, feeling, we use the word feeling, the English word feeling, which is a translation of the Sanskrit word and Pali word Vedana. So it's usually translated as feeling, sometimes translated as sensation, but I don't like that term. I like feeling better. But in Buddhism, there are three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and the third one is sometimes called neutral, sometimes indifference. It's basically just neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And so according to Buddhism, every moment, every experience we have is accompanied by one of those three types of feelings. So every perception, like when we see or hear or smell or taste or feel a sensation in our body, there's always one of those three types of feelings present. When we see, like if we're in a garden, we see a beautiful rose, then we probably have a pleasant feeling, unless you hate roses. And then if we see a pile of garbage, we'll probably have an unpleasant feeling. If we see just a plain wall without any decoration on it, then maybe the feeling is the third one, neutral feeling, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So one of those three types of feelings is there with every single one of our sense perceptions. We have five sense perceptions: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touch, sense of touch. And also we have with the mental consciousness, we have thoughts and memories and fantasies and all that kind of thing going on. And those are also accompanied by feelings. So if we remember some experience in the past that was pleasant, we'll have a pleasant feeling about that. If we remember some painful experience, then there'll be an unpleasant feeling. If we remember a neutral experience, like brushing our teeth this morning, then it's probably neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling. And so So these are happening all the time. One of these three feelings is there in our mind every single moment with every experience we have. And the Buddha, the practice of mindfulness of the feelings involves noticing, trying to notice these feelings as much as we can. I mean, some of them are too subtle or too fast. We can't notice them. But we just notice as much as we can. And the more we develop mindfulness, the more we can notice these feelings. And they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with having any of those feelings. It's just normal. Even the Buddha has feelings, although not unpleasant ones. I think Buddha has only pleasant feelings. But we can't stop feelings from happening. But the reason it's important to notice them is because feelings can then lead to emotions, in particular afflictive emotions. So if we're not careful, this is what can happen. Pleasant feelings, if we have a pleasant feeling for an object, that can lead to attachment, desire, craving. I want more of that. So that's one of the afflictive emotions that gets us into trouble again and again. And then unpleasant feelings, if we're not careful, we're not mindful, those can lead to anger, hatred. I don't like that. I don't like that object. I don't like that person. And then that can escalate into hatred and maybe wanting to do something destructive. Yeah. So and then the third type of feeling, the neither pleasant nor unpleasant, that leads to ignorance. It perpetuates our ignorance of the true nature of things, because we already have ignorance, and having this neutral feeling just perpetuates that. So the Buddha taught the importance of being mindful of our feelings, because if we can notice our feelings when they occur, then we can do something to stop the arisal of the afflictive emotions, of especially attachment and aversion, desire and anger, and so on. So yes, to answer the question, yeah, awareness of feeling tones is a helpful way of working with emotions. In fact, I'm going to be talking about anger, and one of the best sources of information on working with anger is in Shantideva's text called Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. There's different ways of translating that. Bodhicharyavatara. So Shantideva was a great Indian master of about, I don't know, 1,200 years ago. So he wrote this wonderful text, which has been translated numerous ways, probably in French as well as in English. And the Dalai Lama loves this text, so he often teaches it. And in chapter 6 of that text, a whole chapter on patience, which is all about how to manage anger and hatred. So many methods for dealing with anger and hatred. And so one of the first verses in that chapter, I don't remember it by heart, but it says something about how anger is more likely to arise in our mind if we're already feeling unhappy, dissatisfied. Huh? Dissatisfaction, yeah. And so we can see that in our experience, if you wake up in the morning and you're kind of grumpy, not in a good mood, not really happy. And then if you don't do anything about that state of mind, if you just continue feeling that way and you go into your day with that state of mind, you're probably more likely to react to things with anger, getting upset, getting angry, snapping at people. And you'll probably be an unhappy person all day. And yeah, more likely to get angry. On the other hand, sometimes we wake up in the morning and we're in a good state of mind. We feel happy and positive and, yeah, full of positive thoughts and feelings. And on those days, with that state of mind, you're more likely to have good experiences and be a happy person. So we can see that in ourselves, that having an unhappy state of mind, a dissatisfied, disgruntled, grumpy state of mind is like ripe for bringing about anger. And so, yeah, one of the ways of dealing with anger is to just keep track of your mind and notice if your mind is feeling that way. There's that feeling tone of unhappiness and dissatisfaction, and do something about that, deal with that. And then there's less chance that anger would arise. So I hope that answers the question.
And Venerable, actually, I had 3 more just before the end of the break. So I don't know if you want to address them now or later.
We can take care of them now. Yeah.
Do you want me to read them? At least the first one?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says, to recognize the emotions means to be aware of ourselves and to have a clear view on what is healthy or unhealthy in our behavior. But a person that has a bad perception of their own self, for example, someone who is narcissist and convinced to be the best, how can that person improve their quality through their practice? I don't know if my reading is very clear.
So a narcissistic person,
someone who would not have a clear view of whether his or her behavior is healthy or unhealthy, how can that person improve?
Very difficult. Do they even want to? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose if the Buddha was around, the Buddha would have some skillful way of getting that person to to see themselves. But even the Buddha. I mean, there's stories from the time of the Buddha. Buddha would meet people, or people would meet the Buddha, and they might have a very bad character. But even they're with the Buddha, they're in the presence of the Buddha, listening to the teachings of the Buddha, they still don't get it. They still don't change. Like the most famous example is Devadatta, who was the Buddha's own cousin and was a monk. He became a monk and he was living in the community with the Buddha, but he had really bad attitudes. He was jealous of the Buddha. He didn't see any good qualities in the Buddha. He wanted to be the one in charge, wanted to take over and get rid of the Buddha. So, so even though the Buddha is right there, physically present, but still this person's mind, remained negative, and they didn't recognize their negative qualities. So we can't force somebody to change. We can't force someone to look at themselves and recognize their negative qualities. And also Buddhism doesn't believe in proselytizing, like pushing people to listen to the teachings if they don't want to. So we're not supposed to teach unless people really show an interest and express an interest and ask for teachings. So it's not that it's just not the case that we can go around and preach to people and tell them they have to change. But we make the teachings available, and if they are interested, they will come and listen. But I also feel strongly that a very helpful way of getting others to change is to be an example ourselves. Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So if we ourselves just try to live ethically and be compassionate and kind and patient, have all these positive qualities, at least as much as we can, there's a greater chance that others will notice that. And of course, they have to have, from their side, they have to have the karmic seeds, we would say the karmic seeds, to be interested and want to go this way. But then being an example speaks 1,000 words, like they say, actions speak louder than words. Then there's a chance that people will notice our way of being and try to be more like that themselves. So yeah, so it really depends if the person wants to change or not. But yeah, if the person, I mean, it can happen in a Dharma center. There may be someone like that who's coming to the Dharma center and listening to teachings. And hopefully, if they continue listening to teachings, and if they are in the presence of practitioners, teachers and practitioners who are modeling healthier way of being, a more humble and ethical way of being, hopefully that person will be influenced by that and will start to become like that themselves.
Okay. You want me to read the next one?
Yeah.
So what to do when a positive motivation is not present? This happens when I have an intense feeling of not being okay, sometimes because of a belief that I have not been treated fairly, other times because I've overstretched myself in giving to others and feel squeezed out of what I need to feel happy and satisfied. It is difficult to generate an altruistic motivation in these situations. Without the altruistic motivation, I feel I'm not entitled to engage in meditation as a spiritual practice and receive its benefits.
So that was a rather long question, but it seems the essence is how to have a positive motivation in case it isn't there. For various reasons. So there could be various reasons why a positive motivation isn't just spontaneously there in our mind. But one of the main reasons is lack of familiarity with having positive motivations. I mean, probably in our upbringing, until we meet Buddhism, we don't generally think about generating positive motivations. But this is something that our teachers, especially in the Tibetan tradition, really emphasize. And yeah, I don't think we should just expect that a positive motivation is going to pop up in our mind without making any effort, unless we have already made effort. And so it is a question of making yourself familiar with the positive motivation. And one of the best ways of doing that is doing it in the morning, like when you first wake up or have your first cup of tea or coffee or whatever, your mind is awake, then doing some little practice. You can take a passage from a text or whatever, write your own motivation, something that really speaks to your heart, and read that and or memorize it and then recite it to yourself. So even if it's not maybe 100% how you feel, you might be, feeling really grumpy or lousy or whatever, but, read that, reflect on that, and try your best to generate that state of mind. And even if it isn't 100% genuine how you feel, the more you do it, the more you make this effort to generate a positive motivation, the more it does become real. It does become genuine. It's like there's this expression in, I think they use it in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous: fake it until you make it. I don't know how that works in French, but it's like, yeah, initially you are kind of, it's a bit fake, it's a bit artificial. But if you keep doing it and getting really more and more and more familiar with that, it does start to become genuine. It does start to come from your heart rather than you're forcing yourself to think that way. So that's the best way, I think, to generate a positive motivation. And then if we do it in the morning and just try to think, may this affect my whole day, everything I do today, May it be beneficial for others. May it not harm others. May it be a cause of attaining enlightenment. Whatever, however you want to make it. Then there's a greater chance that it will actually carry through in your other activities. You could also find other ways, like little passages from books, Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, stick them onto your wall or have them on your desk at work, just to remind you of those. And then with regard to other factors that might interfere with a positive motivation, like feeling lousy about yourself, feeling I'm no good, I'm worthless, whatever, it's important to work on those things. They're not going to just go away by themselves. So, these are unhealthy, disturbing states of mind. So it's important to, if you can on your own, analyze them, understand what they're all about, apply antidotes to them. If you have trouble doing that on your own, then seek help from teachers or therapists or good Dharma friends. Very, very important to work on those kind of attitudes. They're very prevalent in the West. Many, many, many people in the West have those problems. And there's also a lot of books that are very helpful, like Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. I'm sure there's a French translation of that. And Tara Brach, who's a psychologist and also meditation practitioner and teacher, wrote a book called Radical Self-Acceptance. Is that it? Radical acceptance. Yeah. So that's all about learning to accept yourself as you are, even with your flaws and your whatever. That's very, very helpful. Yeah. So the traditional teachings of Buddhism don't always contain material for this kind of problem because it's such a Western problem. So it's helpful to find like Western teachers, practitioners and teachers who are addressing these kind of problems, these kind of issues. One more.
There is a second question by the same person. So it's how to deal with selfishness. It's a disturbing emotion. Sometimes
I didn't hear first, but how to deal with what?
Selfishness.
Selfishness, okay.
And it goes on saying, sometimes I wish for the peace and clarity brought by meditation as a means to benefiting myself, less conflict provoked by my actions, better clarity and focus in my work. And the person asks, in some of your teaching, you have said these reasons are not correct in between inverted commas, ones to engage in Dharma study and meditation practice. How to deal with these thoughts when they come up?
So the thoughts were, it's such a long question.
That you practice to do for yourself, just you seek for peace and clarity for yourself.
Oh, I see. So thinking I'm practicing for my own peace and clarity, and that seems selfish. Is that the problem? I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to practice in order to have more peace and more clarity, because if we don't have peace and clarity in our mind, how can we help others? If our mind is a mess and we're unhappy and we're confused and not peaceful, can we help others? Can we be effective in helping others and bringing peace and happiness to others if we're miserable? So it's fine. It's fine to have the wish to have peace and clarity and happiness and so on, positive experiences for yourself. But try to expand that and think, I want to help others. I want to be able to give to others and benefit others. But I also need to work on myself and achieve those things for myself. So when you think, I want to be happy, may I and everybody else be happy. I want to have peace. May I and everybody else have peace. And same with clarity of mind and so on. So it's just, again, a question of familiarity, getting more and more familiar with those kinds of thoughts and attitudes, and gradually they do become more genuine, more natural. Yeah, so the Dalai Lama often talks about this, that, yeah, we too need to be happy. We need to have peace of mind. And there's nothing wrong with working for our own peace of mind, but try to not only focus on me, one person alone, and ignore everybody else, but we can think me and everybody else. Okay. Is that it?
Yes, it is.
There's a question here on the table. Please recommend bibliography. There's a lot of books. Maybe I'll do that later towards the end. But yeah, there are some books both in English and French and Spanish where you can find more information on this topic. Okay, so now I'll start talking about more specific emotions and how to deal with them. I'll start with anger. Anger is probably the most destructive of the disturbing emotions. And so we all do experience anger at certain times in certain ways. And it can be at different degrees, different levels, even feelings of irritation, being irritated, being annoyed, being impatient. Those are kind of low level versions of anger. Even a feeling of dislike. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that person. Okay, it's not like full blown anger, but it's that state of mind of, yeah, kind of rejection and seeing a fault, something I don't like. And even though it may not be particularly destructive at that point, but if we're not careful, if we don't do something about it, it could build up and eventually turn into stronger anger that would motivate us to do something harmful or destructive. So and it's disturbing for our meditation as well. Like we're trying to meditate. I have a problem with noise. I get really irritated with noise. It's almost impossible to find a place that's completely quiet. So I really have to work on that and learn how to deal with irritation or dislike of noise. Because yeah, it's definitely disturbing. You can't really develop concentration and peace in your meditation if you're constantly being irritated. And then of course there's the far end of anger, which is like hatred and aggressiveness and wanting, as we can see in the world, it can lead to war and murder and violence and terrorism and hate speech, awful, awful, awful things that cause so much suffering for many people. So, and as I mentioned before, one aspect of anger is that it distorts and exaggerates the object. So there's always an object of anger. It could be another person. It could be an inanimate thing. It could be oneself. We can be angry at ourselves. So when there is anger towards some person or some object, the mind isn't seeing it in a realistic way, but is seeing it in a distorted way, usually focusing on just one or a few traits, characteristics about the object that we don't like, that we find annoying and irritating, and then exaggerating those, and maybe also projecting onto that object things that aren't even there. Like that psychologist told the Dalai Lama, 90% of the bad things we see in another person are projected by ourselves. So this, again, I don't think we do this deliberately, consciously. It's just the function of anger. It's just what happens when anger comes up in our mind and kind of proliferates, takes over our mind. And we don't do anything about it. It just, yeah, takes off. So, what are some things we can do about anger? I think one thing that's really important, not just with anger, but with any of the disturbing emotions, is to recognize how harmful they are. Um, 'Cause if we're not clear about that, if we don't clearly see that, that particular emotion is harmful, is the cause of problems, then in situations, especially where we have kind of righteous anger, we feel it's right to be angry at Putin. It's right to be angry at rapists and so on, because they're doing such awful things. So I have the right to be angry at them. So then in those kind of situations, then we may not feel any motivation, any incentive to do anything. We feel this is the right way to think, the right way to feel, the right way to be. And so instead of dealing with it, we will feed it. Yeah, we just feed it, let it grow. And so it's important to recognize that anger is harmful, is destructive, um, causes suffering and problems for others and for oneself. So the Buddhist texts explain a lot of the disadvantages of anger, but I think it's also important to look at our own experience and become convinced ourselves of the faults of anger. So we've had plenty of experiences in our life. We can look back at those and just see, well, what came of that? What happened from my being angry? Did it bring any benefit, any good results? So hopefully we'll recognize that it just brought a lot of problems and nothing really good came of it. So that's one way we can investigate or explore anger. And then we can also look at the experiences of others. What happens, when other people get angry? How do they behave? How do they look? What do they do? What are the consequences of that? And so there's like immediate effects of anger that we can notice if we pay attention. Like, what does it do to our body? Do we feel good? Do we feel calm and peaceful when we're angry? And what does it do to our mind? Is our mind calm and peaceful and in a happy state? So hopefully we'll recognize that it's not it disturbs our mind and even physically. Yeah, it feels really uncomfortable, maybe hard to sit still. We can enjoy other things, like if you're really angry, you may not feel like eating. And even if you do eat, you may not enjoy your food. You have trouble sleeping because your mind is just so full of angry thoughts. Even if you do fall asleep, you'll wake up in the middle of the night with angry thoughts and can't get back to sleep. So it disturbs your sleep. If you try to go for a walk in a beautiful place, do you really enjoy what you're seeing? Or is your mind just so occupied with anger that you don't even see anything? You don't even enjoy anything? So if you pay attention, you can notice that, yeah, it disturbs our happiness, our health, our peace of mind, also our relationships, the way we behave, the way we talk and treat people when we're angry. It can be very harmful to them. And not just the one we're angry at, but, we may take our anger out on other people, who are completely innocent. They're not the ones who did anything to harm us, but, they're there. And so we shout at them and kick the dog and things like that. So, yeah. So it has adverse effects on the people around us and also on ourself, our own health, our body, our mind, and so on. And so those are like immediate effects, obvious, visible effects of anger. And then Buddhism talks about other effects that we may not be able to recognize or notice in the immediate sense, but they're more long term. In terms of karma, karma basically means the things that we do will bring about results in the future. And actions that we do motivated by anger, whether we do something physically with our body or verbally with our speech, or even just having angry thoughts in our mind, these leave imprints that will bring about more problems in the future, further down the line, maybe in this life, future lives, and so on. So is that what we want to do? Do we want to create suffering and problems for ourselves? And also, it's said to have the effect of destroying our good karma. So, we have to work really hard to create good karma, to create positive energy, like helping others, being generous, being ethical, and so on. So we create good karma, good energy by doing those things. But it said that getting angry can destroy or damage or neutralize a lot of that good energy so that it is unable to bring its results, or the results will be delayed. So that's not good. Yeah, that would be like working really hard all month at your job, and then you get your paycheck, and then you throw it into a fire. I mean, that would be really dumb. Nobody would do that, but it might fall into the fire accidentally. So that would be terrible. But that's a bit like, creating, putting a lot of energy into creating merit or good karma, good energy, and then getting angry and like destroying all of that. So it's good to think about these, learn about these, think about them to see if they're true or not, and become convinced that these are the harmful results of anger. And the more you are certain about that, the more your mind is firm about that, then the greater the chance is that when even if you find yourself in a situation where anger is coming up and you may feel, it's right to be angry. I should be angry. This knowledge of the destructive results of anger will help you to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go down that road. I like to think of like when we're driving and we come to a roundabout, and they have these different roads going off in different directions. So you can choose, you can take your pick which road you want to follow. So it's like that when we find ourselves in a situation where anger is coming up. It's like a roundabout. And it may seem like we don't have any choice. Yeah, we might think, I have no choice but to be angry in this moment and act out my anger. But that's actually not true. There's always alternatives, other choices. And the more we have learned about those other choices and maybe practiced them, tried them out, the more likely it will be for us to say, we get to the roundabout, okay, there's the anger road. No, I don't want to go down that road. There's another road. There's the patience road. There's the compassion road. There's the run away from the situation rather than getting angry. That's another alternative. Just, like Shanti David says, turn to wood or turn to stone. What does he say? Wood. Yeah, become like a piece of wood. Just don't react at that moment. Don't say anything, don't do anything. Get some space from the situation. Cool down, think about it more carefully before you respond. That's actually quite helpful. Yeah, I do that sometimes with emails. When I get an email, I get an email and like, and And then I go back, I pause, and then I go back and read it, and I realize, wait a minute, it's not that bad. So just giving yourself a chance to pause, relax, take a few deep breaths, think about it, and then look again at what's actually said or what's actually going on there. And you may realize, oh, this isn't, there's nothing here to get angry about. So there's always choices, and that itself is really, really liberating, just to realize we do have a choice. I remember once when I was it was that same time I mentioned earlier when I was just really, really struggling with anger, a lot of anger coming up in my mind. And there was one time when I was sitting there and I thought, I have a choice. I don't have to be angry. And it was like a light bulb going off in my head. I don't know, it's like something obvious in a way, but at that moment it was really liberating to realize, okay, there's this anger in my mind, but I don't have to go with it. I don't have to believe in it. I can do something else with my mind. There are choices, there are alternatives. And so, yeah, like I say, Buddhism, Shantideva's chapter 6 is full of choices, full of alternatives to the anger road. And also, the more you do try these other roads, and you find, oh, this is much better than the anger road. Anger road, that just leads to a cliff, going off a cliff. Disaster, fire. I don't want to go that way. And these other roads, wow, they're much nicer. So the more you get a taste for the other roads and how much nicer they are, you're naturally going to want to go down those roads. It does take time. I mean, I've been working on this for years, decades. So, I mean, it's not something instant, but I'm confident that it does work. If you try these methods, they do work. So one of the main antidotes, the kind of direct antidotes to anger, is loving kindness. It's the opposite state of mind. Because with anger, we usually want to do harm. We want to hurt somebody. We want to make them suffer. And loving kindness is the opposite, wanting to make them happy. And so when you're really angry at somebody, it's not easy to completely switch 180 degrees to the opposite state of mind. On the other hand, if we work on cultivating loving kindness and make our minds more and more familiar with that way of thinking, then it is easier to switch. I was just thinking, this story I heard from a woman, actually a French woman. She was living in Spain and she was working for American Express. And her job was to answer the phone when clients who were using the service would call and they were having some kind of problem. Something wasn't working and they were usually angry, upset. And so she said when, she'd answer the phone and she could hear the tone of voice of the person and they were angry, then that would trigger her anger. She would get angry. And then she'd kind of be speaking to them in a, irritated way, and that would increase their anger. They would get more angry, and then that would increase her anger. So they were kind of feeding each other's anger, and it would turn into a really unpleasant conversation. And so then she learned, she started coming to Buddhism and learned this practice of loving kindness, metta, where you wish others to be happy, like in the prayer of the four immeasurables. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness and so on. So she started using that in her work. So when she would answer the phone and she'd hear the anger in the other person's voice, she would just mentally say to herself, may you be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy. And that helped her to not get angry, to not, treat the other person in an angry way, speak in an angry way, but in a more calm, civil way. And what she noticed was if she could remain like that, non-angry, the other person would calm down as well. And then they could have a decent conversation. So my guess is that when she was saying to herself, may you be happy, may you be happy, maybe she was still kind of on the verge of getting angry, but just using that as a method to help her own anger to calm down. And it did have a good outcome just in an immediate sense. So it can be helpful. You could try it. It's worth a try. When you're feeling somebody is pushing your anger buttons, just to think, may you be happy. I wish you to be happy. And also, I once heard Tenzin Palmo, Jetsun Tenzin Palmo, the well-known nun who lived in a cave for 12 years and wonderful teacher. So I once heard her talk about how it actually makes complete sense to wish happiness to someone that you're annoyed at, that you're angry at, because the reason the person is behaving that way is because they're suffering, they're unhappy, they're troubled, they're suffering. And if you get angry, if you're angry at them, you want them to suffer more. Well, then what? Yeah, if they suffer more, they're just going to get worse. They'll probably do more nasty things, awful things. Yeah. So being angry at them and wishing them to suffer, or wishing to, wanting to do something to make them suffer, is not at all a useful solution. It's just going to make things worse. On the other hand, wishing that person to be happy, yeah, if that person could be happy instead of suffering, then they probably wouldn't behave the way they are. They wouldn't behave in those nasty ways. They'd be a nice person. And then, they'd be easier to like. Something like that. So I thought, wow, that's great. That really makes sense. It's logical. And so there's a logic to having loving kindness, wishing happiness for a so-called enemy, someone you dislike, someone you find annoying. Yeah, if that person could be happy or happier, then they wouldn't behave the way they are. And they wouldn't be so annoying and irritating. It'd be easier to get along with, right? That makes sense. So it's good to think about that and try to generate more that kind of thought, that kind of feeling of wishing happiness for the other person. And then similarly, compassion. This is really effective in dealing with anger, because compassion, the difference between loving kindness and compassion, they're very similar, but loving kindness is more about wishing the other to be happy, and compassion is more about wishing them to not suffer. They're kind of like two sides of a coin, two sides of a hand. They're very similar, but just a little bit different emphasis. So with compassion, we try to understand the other person, what's going on with them, and that's really effective in dealing with anger. Because again, when people are behaving in ways that are negative or harmful or disturbing, irritating, it's probably because they're suffering. They may have physical suffering. They may be sick or injured, in pain. And it's hard to be in a good state of mind when you're in pain or when you're worried or anxious. So there may be physical suffering, there may be mental suffering, The person might be worried about something, anxious about something, or just disturbed by disturbing emotions. Like Buddhism says, we all have these disturbing emotions in our mind, and they just pop up without choice, without control. And when they do, they take over our mind, and sometimes they make us a little bit crazy. So we do things that are motivated by these disturbing emotions, and sometimes people don't care how they affect others, what consequences they have for others, whatever. They're just acting out these disturbing emotions. And it's painful. Having disturbing emotions in the mind is painful. We can see that for ourselves, looking at our own experience. When we're angry, when we're jealous, when we're craving, full of craving, or fear, anxiety, it's painful. It's not a peaceful, pleasant state of mind. It's a disturbing, painful state of mind. So the more we can see that in our own experience, then the better we can understand that with somebody else. So when we observe somebody else who's caught up in those emotions, like anger, like Putin right now, I think he's just full of anger and hatred and fear and anxiety and jealousy and all these disturbing emotions, and of course ignorance. So his mind must just be like hell. Yeah, already in a hell state. So contemplating that, getting some sense of that, gives openness, space in our mind for compassion, wishing that that person could be free of their suffering. Also, karma can also, if you accept karma, then you can think the kind of karma that person is creating. Oh, ouch. So much negative karma, and what's going to happen to them, how they're going to suffer in the future. Lama Zopa Rinpoche tells a story of one Geshe who would cry out of compassion whenever he thought about Mao Zedong. Even though Mao Zedong was like Tibet's #1 enemy, he did all these awful things for Tibet, for China as well. But this Geshe would think about how much suffering he's created for himself by all the negative karma, all the death, all the destruction, all the terrible things that person has done, and how he will probably suffer for a really, really, really long time as when the karma ripens. So just crying out of compassion for Mao Zedong. So that's like, a Jewish person crying for Hitler out of compassion. Pretty extraordinary. But that just shows, if we really contemplate the suffering of people we are annoyed at, people we dislike, the suffering they're experiencing now while their mind is caught up in all these disturbing thoughts and emotions, the suffering they will experience in the future when their karma ripens in the form of probably much worse suffering, then it's possible, instead of feeling angry, to feel compassion. So it's a kind of wonderful way of transforming the mind from anger to compassion. Yeah, and also just contemplating how everybody wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. So this person is just like me. They're just trying to be happy and avoid suffering. And also another thing that can help sometimes is understanding the background. What kind of experiences that person had in their life. Maybe they were abused as a child. I've heard, like, in prison, most of the people in prison, incarcerated people who've committed violent crimes, if you look at their childhood, it was just horrific. They had horrible experiences as children. And so this doesn't mean condoning, okay? It's not at all about condoning a person's behavior and saying, oh, that's fine, they can do that, they can behave that way. No, we still condemn that kind of behavior, violent, harmful behavior. We say that is wrong, but we're generating compassion for the person. So this is another really, really helpful thing, is to separate the person and their behavior or their attitudes. Those are not the same thing. Just like I was saying before with ourselves, when anger comes up in our mind, we are not our anger. Anger is not who we are. So it's the same with another person. Putin is not his anger. He is not his hatred. Those are just states of mind that come up without any choice. He probably doesn't choose to be that way. There's just so many causes and conditions, from past life karma, past life afflictions, and then experiences in this life, and many, many, many factors and causes and conditions from all directions that have brought him to where he is at now, with all this anger and hatred and wanting to make war and I don't know, all the stuff going on in his mind. But it's, yeah, probably not what he chose, but it's just like a tsunami wave, it just builds up and we just get carried along on this wave of all these different factors and causes and conditions, and find ourselves having these kind of thoughts and feelings, and maybe even thinking, this is the right thing to do. I'm doing the right thing. But it's diluted. It's all mistaken, all confused, ignorant, and just creating suffering, not only for others, but also for oneself. And this is not who a person is. Okay, it's just these factors in their mind, ignorance and greed and hatred and selfishness that they have no control over. So separating out the different factors here. There's the person who has Buddha nature and has good qualities. Everybody has good qualities. Everybody has compassion. Everybody has love. Everybody has wisdom. Everybody has potential, positive potential. But unfortunately, we have these other things too. The negative ones, the disturbing ones. Sometimes they just overwhelm. They get too strong. And the good qualities kind of get buried underneath, but they're there. They can never be destroyed or lost or taken away. They're always there. So one thing I find helpful is to try to imagine how things appear to a Buddha's view, a Buddha's view of things, a Buddha's view of Putin, a Buddha's view of Mao Zedong or Hitler or whoever happens to be annoying me at that moment. How does a Buddha see that person? They see the person much differently than I do. They can see their potential, their good qualities, and know that whatever delusions or afflictions they have and whatever harmful things they're doing, this is not who they are. This is not all there is. It's just something temporary, transitory, and they can be free of that. And one day this person will be a Buddha too. Sometimes it's hard to believe that, but it's in the teachings. I mean, the Buddha himself, he wasn't always a Buddha. He was an ordinary person, and he must have done bad things too. He was in hell. So if he was in hell, that must mean he did some really bad things. But he managed to emerge from that and become a Buddha, become enlightened. So we can do it too. We have that potential, and this annoying person can do it too. So these are some ways of thinking that can help us stop being angry and hateful, and instead have compassion and the wish to help the person rather than harm them. And we want to reach out and help them. Okay, another method I use, to not always as much as I should, but I find it really helpful. I call it the mirror method. And this is based on the idea. I first came across this. I was reading a book Buddhist book, and I came across this statement that we wouldn't see faults in other people if we didn't have faults in ourselves. And that was such a startling thing for me. I was still quite new at that time, and I'd always been very critical, judgmental of other people. So I thought, oh, does this mean I have all those faults that I see in other people? It was like shocking. But I tried it out. I explored it and found it is true. Um, so the idea here is we have things in ourselves we don't like, certain aspects of our mind, our emotions, our behavior that we think, this isn't good. I don't like this. I don't want to be that way. And maybe our whole life we've been doing that. We've kind of maybe suppressing or denying or judging ourselves for having those particular qualities. So we don't accept. We're not accepting of those things in ourselves. We judge them and we may deny them as well. And so when we see those same kind of qualities in somebody else, we see another person who's like that, behaving that way, manifesting that quality, then that same kind of attitude comes up. That's wrong. That's bad. You shouldn't be that way. So judgmentalness, criticalness comes up towards that person. And we may not even be aware of this whole process. It's just an automatic thing, just immediately feeling, I don't like that person. That person is bad. That person is horrible. I don't want to be around them, whatever. So this technique that I developed is to, when you do feel angry or critical or judgmental towards another person, to do some contemplation of that and ask yourself, what is it about them that I don't like? Is it some attitude, way of behaving, whatever? So pinpoint that, then turn around and look at yourself and ask, do I have that? Is that something that's in me? Or if it's a behavior, is that something I have ever done? And when I do this, I always find it true. Just a simple example. Like if I'm driving, when I was living in Singapore, I had a car, so I was driving around a lot, and if another driver drove too fast or they changed lanes without signaling or, something they're not supposed to do, I'd find myself getting annoyed. I would get angry driving around. It's funny, I didn't get angry in many other situations, but I would often get angry while driving. So that was interesting. So then I'd ask myself, did I ever do that? Oh, yes, I can remember. I've done that too. So as soon as you realize that, your anger kind of drops away. Like, how can I be angry at somebody else for doing something I have done myself? And there's always reasons behind it. They may not be good reasons, but you're in a hurry, you're distracted, you're talking to somebody, so you're not really fully attentive to what you're doing. And so the same could be true for this person. And so that's just a simple example. But then with other things like more internal qualities, internal traits that may be more difficult. If you see somebody who seems greedy or selfish or jealous or proud, arrogant. So then just check, is that something that I have in myself? And in some cases, I've had to really go deep inside, it wasn't like immediately apparent. But the more I looked, the more I dug into my mind, then I would come to see, yes, I have that too. And it's usually something I don't like. I don't want to be that way. I think, that's not a good way to be. I don't want to be that way. So maybe I was kind of denying it, suppressing it, trying to be different than that, but it's still there. still there. And in fact, this is a really effective way of getting to know yourself better, getting to know things in yourself that you may not have noticed before. Like, I'll tell you a story. This is quite a powerful experience for me. My older brother went through a period of time where he was very like fundamentalist Christian. He was going to some church that was, yeah, very kind of fundamentalist. And he wrote a letter to me, like 5-page letter, critical of Buddhism, criticizing Buddhism and criticizing me for being Buddhist. And I got so angry when I read this letter. I was just, and I had all these thoughts about retaliating, things that I could say to him back that would be nasty and mean. But fortunately, I knew enough that I didn't want to do that. No, I don't want to go that road. That's not the way I want to be. So I was trying all these other ways of dealing with my anger. And I tried this one, the mirror method. And so I asked myself, well, what is it? Why am I so upset? What is it about him in this letter that's so upsetting to me? And what I came to was intolerance. He was being intolerant, not accepting other religions. Like, his view was there's only one way, that's my way. Everybody else is wrong. And so I asked myself, am I like that? And at first I said, no way, no. I don't want to be that way. Definitely. I want to be totally open and tolerant and accepting of everybody and their view and their religion and so on. But then I went deeper and I realized, actually, that's the way I want to be. But in fact, I am intolerant. There is intolerance in me. For example, I'm really intolerant of fundamentalist Christians because they're so intolerant. I thought, whoa, it's really difficult to be tolerant because that means you have to accept people like that and their point of view, even though they think you're wrong and you're going to go to hell. So it was a real eye opener for me to just, recognize that in myself, recognize my lack of tolerance, even though I wanted to be tolerant, and how hard it is to be truly tolerant. So this is one of the benefits of this practice, that we can recognize things in ourselves that we may be blind to. They're there, and they may be affecting us, affecting our way of thinking and being and feeling and so on. And if we don't recognize those things, they're still there and they're still affecting us. So it's important to be able to recognize that. So in the end, what I did with my brother, I did want to respond to his letter, not just ignore it. And so I spent a couple of days preparing myself mentally how to talk to him. And so we talked on the phone, and I said, that letter you wrote, I felt quite upset about it. I wasn't angry, I didn't throw my anger at it. I just said it was upsetting to me. And he immediately apologized. He said, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just had to say those things. They were on my mind for a long time, and I had to say them. And then I had read this story about the Buddha. The Buddha was, some of Buddha's disciples were walking along a road, and they overheard, I think there were some followers of another sect, another religious sect behind them. And those people were talking about the Buddha and saying negative things about the Buddha. And so the Buddha's disciples were overhearing this and getting really upset. And so they went to talk to the Buddha. And the Buddha said, it isn't appropriate for followers of mine to get upset if they hear criticism of me or my teachings. And I thought, wow, what an amazing thing to say. I was really impressed with that. And the Buddha went on to say, what you should do is analyze what is being said and find faults in it or find mistakes in it, like if they're misjudging or misinterpreting, and then go to them and explain, this is not true. Buddha's not like that. Buddha's teachings are not like that. Just point out the mistakes in them. So I thought that's a really wise way of doing things, as opposed to what most religions do, is just get into violence and fighting and destruction with each other. And so I did that with my brother. So there were things in his letter that were actually incorrect, things he was saying about Buddhism that were wrong. And so I just pointed those out to them, and he listened, he accepted, and we ended up on friendly terms, and he never tried that again. So, but it also really helped me to think that, where is he coming from? Why is he doing this? And it occurred to me that he's trying to save me, because according to his religious views, I'm going to go to hell. And I know he loves me, and I don't think he wants me to go to hell. So I think he was trying to save me. And so realizing that really helped as well. That, yeah, I don't think he was doing this with a harmful intention, but rather a good intention, according to his views, his beliefs. So I kind of used a lot of different methods in dealing with that situation, and they were all very helpful. And in the end, it did work out. So this also illustrates that, in that kind of situation where we're having a problem with another person or a conflict with another person, I don't think it's the case that we should just sit on our meditation cushion and work on our anger and not ever try to talk to the person, especially if that person is somebody very close, like a relative or friend or member of the community. It is useful to go and talk to them, or it can be, maybe not always, but it can be useful. And explain to them, what you did, what you said, how it affected me, and let's talk about this. Because otherwise, if that person continues that kind of behavior, nobody ever says anything to them, then they may be hurting more and more and more people. And that's not good for others. It's also not good for them, because they don't realize that what they're doing is harmful, is creating suffering. But then you just have to be careful when you go into that kind of conversation, not to have any expectations. I'm going to get them to agree with me, to change and become the way I want them to be. If you have those kind of expectations, it may not work. Better not to have any expectations, because you just don't know how they're going to react. So I was kind of preparing myself for various scenarios, but fortunately it turned out well. Yeah, and nonviolent communication, which I haven't had the chance to study much. That's a very, very helpful method that's used here in the Abbey. NVC, nonviolent communication. Okay, I'll just mention one other method. There's lots of methods, but one other one is karma. If you believe in karma, if you're able to accept karma, then that can be helpful to bring into your mind. Like if somebody's harming you, doing something harmful to you, the Buddhist explanation of that is, this is the result, the karmic result of harmful things we did in the past. So you might even be able to remember something in this lifetime that you did that was hurtful to that person or upsetting to that person. So you may have hurt them and now they're hurting you back. However, the teachings on karma say most of the experiences we have in this life are the result of karma from past lives. So most of us can't remember past lives, but we can guess. We can guess we did things that were harmful, hurtful, unethical. And so thinking of karma, like if somebody's being nasty to me, and I think, okay, this is happening to me because I was nasty to people in the past, and certainly in this life, I can remember doing that, but also past lives as well. So this is the karmic result of my own behavior. So thinking in that way explains why it's happening. It's happening. I'm responsible. I am the person who's created the cause for what is happening to me, due to my ignorance and other afflictions. And um, so then you're less likely to blame the other person. You maybe completely drop your anger at the other person because you recognize you are the one who created this situation. And the beneficial thing of this is to then have conviction in karma and think, I don't like this kind of thing happening to me. I don't want more of this kind of thing happening in the future. Therefore, I have to make sure that I don't create the causes, that I don't do the actions, the karmic actions that would bring about this experience in the future. And so it gives us this conviction to stop creating negative actions, refrain from creating negative actions, and instead create positive actions, good karma. So I found that really helpful once when somebody was treating me really badly. And so I thought about, some of the things I did when I was a kid with my younger siblings. I could certainly, I didn't have to think of past lives, just this lifetime. I did some pretty nasty things to my siblings. And but I found it really, really, really powerful to think, now I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of this, that kind of behavior. And I don't want to do this to anybody. I don't want to make anybody else go through this kind of experience. It's horrible. It's painful. And so there was this really deep, like from the depth of my being, this sense that I never want to treat anybody like that again. I never want to do anything or say anything that causes suffering to another person, because it's awful. And so that was very, very helpful way of dealing with that situation. And also, thinking about how much suffering the other person must be going through to be treating me like that. Because again, when we're in a good state of mind and we're feeling good and happy and everything's going well, that's not when we do nasty things. That's not when we mistreat others, is it? Usually, that's my experience. But when we do nasty things, it's because we're suffering. Our own mind is in pain, is disturbed, is troubled. So if someone is behaving that way, it must be the case that they are unhappy, they are suffering, they are disturbed. And I even thought, this other person is probably suffering even more than me. The suffering I'm experiencing, being on the receiving end of their nastiness, is probably not as bad as the suffering they are experiencing, being nasty, behaving in that way. So I found that helpful, to let go of anger and feel compassion for the other person. And it reminds me of, I heard a story of a Tibetan Lama who was visiting one of the Nazi death camps, maybe Auschwitz, which had been turned into a museum, and looking at a photo of Nazi guards torturing one of the prisoners. This Lama said, I feel compassion for the victim. I feel even more compassion for the torturers, the perpetrators, the ones doing this. And the people with him were like, surprised. That's not the normal thing people think. So they asked him why. And he said, the suffering of the victim will be over quickly, but the suffering of the torturers will go on for a long time. So I found that story quite powerful. And it's, related to karma. Because again, when someone's doing something nasty, harmful, awful, creating suffering for others, they're creating the cause for a lot of suffering for themselves that will go on for a long time. So if we really believe in the teachings on karma, then that's what they say. And so contemplating that can help us change our mind from feeling angry and hateful and wanting to retaliate to feeling compassion, wanting to help. So those are just some of the methods for dealing with anger, ones that I have found very, very helpful, very effective. There's many more. And I think it's helpful to have a toolbox full of methods, because in some situations, one method might be effective and another one isn't. But in another situation, that one may be effective and that one doesn't. So if you have a number of different tools that you can try, hopefully you'll find at least one that is effective in enabling you to release your anger, let go of your anger, and even better still, change your mind so that you have more positive thoughts and feelings towards the person. So we're almost to the end of this session. I won't go on to the next one. Are there any questions either from online or Yang Chen?
Venerable, one time, Jitsuma Tenzin Palmo in a teaching said that anger you can like convert it in a positive energy because it has a lot of energy, and that you can convert it. I don't know if you can elaborate on that. I don't remember the details, sorry.
My understanding is, according to what I have learned, is you can't actually transform anger itself. The state of mind of anger is distorted, diluted. You can't actually transform that, but you can deal with the anger so that it decreases or goes away, it stops. And then you can replace it with something else like compassion, love, patience. Is that right, Geshe-la? You're understanding?
I think it depends on how one defines anger. In the Western psychology, they understand anger a little differently and not equate with hatred. Whereas in Tibetan, if we use the term Kongdo and Shedam, they are interchangeable. And Kongdo usually is translated as anger, but I think that's problematic. That's where the problem is. So I've come up with a solution to that for my own use, to not call anger, to not call Kongdo anger, but Tsikwa Sawa, a kind of colloquial term which doesn't fall into any of these two technical terms. So I think I've heard about the creative energy of anger, something like that. And very, very often people say, anger, you have the right to be angry. And anger can push you to action. So that's where this understanding of how anger, while retaining it, could be used for positivity. Whereas if we approach it from a Buddhist perspective, particularly equate with Kongdo, which is the same as Shedang, then as you very clearly mentioned, there is no way by which anger itself can be used into something positive. That's how I think.
Yeah, that reminds me of this story that I heard. There was a conference of Nobel Peace Prize laureates, people who'd won the Nobel Prize. His Holiness is one of those, and he was giving a talk about anger and saying how harmful it is. And one woman in the audience who had also won the Nobel Peace Prize, got up and said, "I'm sorry, Your Holiness, but I don't agree with you. If I hadn't been angry about mines, landmines, I wouldn't have done the work I did that won me the Nobel Prize." So she had, she got really upset about all these landmines that had been left over after wars, like Cambodia and Vietnam, and I don't know where else, Afghanistan. And they're just there in the ground. And then they sometimes get triggered off by children and farmers. People get killed or they get their legs blown off. Awful, awful things. So she was so upset about that, angry about that. And then she started this organization to get rid of those mines. And they did amazing work. And she won the Nobel Prize for the work that she did. So it started with anger. So I think that's like an example of how, anger about injustice or about suffering that's being caused and so on can motivate someone to do an action that brings about an end of that kind of suffering, or at least tries to end that suffering. So if anger is there at the beginning and it's connected with compassion, that kind of anger is compassion. She had compassion for all of the children and people who were killed and injured. She wanted to stop that. So there's compassion, and she's, I have to do something about this. So there's lots of cases like that of people who, are motivated, strongly motivated to end these awful actions that cause suffering. So there may be some anger, but there's a lot of energy there. And if you can put that energy into something beneficial and useful, creative, then that's maybe probably what Tenzin Palmo was talking about. So maybe we'll stop there. And if there are questions, you can send them to me and I can answer them in tomorrow's session. So this is the end of today's sessions. Still have tomorrow. So tomorrow I plan to talk about attachment and also fear, because that's a big one many people ask about. And we'll see if we have time to do a few more as well. I have a whole list of different disturbing emotions and what to do about them, but we have limited time. But there are resources, there are books that I can mention if you do want to know more about these topics. So, maybe we'll recite dedication prayers. And if you don't know the prayers, you don't want to recite them, you can just mentally dedicate the positive energy we've created, that it will bring peace and happiness and end suffering and the causes of suffering, like these disturbing emotions, in the minds of all living beings, and help us all get closer to enlightenment.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Thank you. Merci.